If you want to use Ableton Live for your worship keys rig, then this video is for you. You might be aware that there's several different versions of Ableton Live currently available, and in this video I want to demystify and explain the different versions, their pros, cons, and limitations, so you can find great clarity on the version that's going to be the best fit for you and your budget. Let's take a look. All right, folks, so obviously there's two numbers of Ableton, right? You have Ableton Live 9, and then recently, last year, early this year, Ableton released Ableton 10. But both versions are functionally very similar. Ableton 10 introduced some cool new features, but Ableton 9 can do much of what Ableton Live 10 can. So really where more people get confused is that there's different versions of each of those numbers of Ableton. So you have Intro, Standard, and Suite, and then you also have Ableton Live Lite. Now, if you have an Ableton Live Lite license, you probably got it when you bought a keyboard or an audio interface, and I'm not going to mention it for very long here in this video because it has some serious limitations that, in my opinion, don't really make it a good option for live worship keys players. So we're going to talk more about Intro, Standard, and Suite. So when I say these, you can assume that it's going to be the same in 9 or 10 for Ableton. So to start off with, if you really want to dig into the differences between Intro, Standard, and Suite, the best place to go is to the Ableton website because they have charts of the differences all the way across the board so you can get a really good overview. But I want to highlight a couple of the things that really have the most impact on us as worship keys players. So for us, that ends up being the track count, the scene count, and the number of instruments that are included in each of those versions. So we'll start with the most limited version, which is Ableton Live Intro. Ableton Live Intro has a 16 track limit. That's audio and MIDI tracks, and then you can only have 8 scenes. Now, in the worship key space, oftentimes you'll use scenes to trigger different presets in real time during your live performance. So you're going to be limited to only 8 vertical scenes in Ableton Live Intro. And then lastly, Ableton Intro comes with 4 built-in instrument plugins. Now you can supplement that with third-party external plugins that you purchase in addition, but you only have those 4 basic instruments in Ableton Live Intro. Next is Ableton Live Standard, which features unlimited tracks and scenes, which is a really great thing for worship keys players because then you don't have to worry about running out of room for triggering the instruments that you'd like. Standard comes with 5 different instrument plugins and a good range of audio and MIDI effects. And lastly is Ableton Live Suite. Now, Suite also features unlimited tracks and scenes just like Standard. So the biggest difference between Standard and Suite is that Suite comes with 15 really high quality instrument plugins. So a huge difference of additional built-in sounds in Ableton Suite. So if you're comparing Standard to Suite, the consideration is kind of whether you want tons of built-in sounds with Ableton Suite or if you want to spend less money on Standard and then supplement it with third-party plugins like Omnisphere, Keyscape, stuff from Contact, things like that. So both of them feature unlimited tracks and scenes, and the difference is the sounds that they include. Now again, if you want to get a step-by-step or item-by-item overview of the differences between the different versions of Ableton, then the best place to go is to the Ableton website. But it's important to keep the track limitations and the scene limitations of Ableton Intro in mind. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the difference between Ableton Live 9 and Ableton Live 10, because in my opinion, functionally for worship keys players, there's not much you can do in 10 that you can't also do in 9. Now, from the Ableton website or brand new from sellers like Sweetwater, you're only going to be able to purchase Ableton 10 licenses now that Ableton Live 10 has been released. But it's not that hard to find secondhand, new in the box versions of Ableton Live 9 on used sellers like Reverb.com. And oftentimes they're going to be several $100s cheaper than buying Ableton Live 10 licenses. So if you're just testing the waters, if you're trying to figure out if this is the direction you want to go, you may consider looking for a reputable used copy. It's going to be new in the box, but it's going to be previously owned by somebody else, a copy of Ableton Live 9 because there's not much that you can't do in Ableton Live 9 as a Worship Keys player. And the great thing about purchasing a 9 license is that if you decide, I really love this, I want to see what I can do in 10, you can actually pay to upgrade to Ableton Live 10 at any time. So which version of Ableton Live are you going to go with? Well, in my opinion, if you're brand new to the Worship Keys space and you're on a tight budget, you can definitely get some great Worship Keys sounds out of only Ableton Intro. And you can find a copy of Ableton 10 Intro from the Ableton website for $100. You can find copies of 9 Intro for maybe 30, 40, 50 bucks online in the used market. And you're gonna have a great piano sound and some really good synth sounds as well. But if you continue to grow your Ableton Keys rig, you're probably going to run into the limitations of tracks and scenes in Ableton Intro at some point. The good news is you can always upgrade Intro to Standard and then Standard to Suite if you'd like. So if you go from Intro to Standard, then you're going to be deciding between, do I eventually want to upgrade to Suite and have more built-in sounds, or would I rather stick with Standard for good and invest in some great third-party plugins? There's really not a bad way to go. It just depends on what your budget is, where your comfort level is, and how much time you want to invest in taking ownership of the software. I hope that this video helped you decide which version of Ableton is right for you. And no matter which version you choose, I want to share a resource with you called Sunday Keys for Ableton. This is our done-for-you Worship Keys template that works in Ableton Live 9 and 10, Intro, Standard, or Suite, and gives you tons of great ready-to-play Worship Keys sounds. And we've done all the complex programming under the hood for you, so you can just plug in your MIDI hardware and start playing. So if you'd like to check out Sunday Keys for yourself, go ahead and click the link in the description of this video right now. I'll also include a link in the description to our download of some free Ableton Worship Keys patches to help you get started with using Ableton for your Worship Keys sounds. Be sure to subscribe and leave a comment so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching and have a great day.